Hi, my name is Danielle. I'm an occupational therapist at Helping Hand Center. Today we're doing our second video in the parent handwriting series. These series are something that we're releasing during COVID to just kind of help parents who are trying to help their children at home with their handwriting skills. So today we're going to be going over print capital letters, and if you would like more general information on handwriting, I encourage you to look at the first video that we'll have posted, which kind of went over more general handwriting techniques. So I'm going to share here our PowerPoint. So like I said, this is our second video in our series for our parent handwriting group. So first of all, welcome. Today we're going to go through, we're just going to briefly review what we chatted about last time. We're going to we're going to talk about how to progress to the next stage of just general pre-writing strokes that we talked about last time to printing capital letters. We'll go over tips and tricks, and we'll also go over on how to work on handwriting skills without actually writing. So just very quickly to review what we discussed last time. We went over biomechanical components of the hand, how a young child's hand looks different than a child's hand who may be starting writing, and then how a child who's expected to be just starting writing might look different from a child who we would expect to have their writing mastered. So the hand and the bones and the structures in the hand all develop over time. And as such, the development of grasp patterns occurs as well. So we reviewed the biomechanical last time. We talked about writing letters versus drawing letters, how it's important to have a good foundation of how to write the letters so that your child is actually writing them versus drawing, and that's just going to help with hand fatigue. It's going to help with quickness of writing. We talked a lot about pre-writing strokes last time and shapes, and we talked about the developmental progression and how that feeds into writing. And then our tip and trick that we went over last time was letter sizing. So if your child has trouble with letter sizing, I urge you to look at the previous video for tips and tricks on that. And then we also talked about multi-sensory handwriting strategies. So today, like I said, we're moving on to print, and we're moving on to capital letters. So typically we progress from pre-writing shapes and strokes to capital letters. Our shapes and strokes definitely are components of capital letters. A triangle kind of resembles the letter A. All those pre-writing strokes give us the foundation skills we need for actually creating the letters. And we always start with capitals. I want my kiddos to have a pretty solid foundation of writing their capitals before we'll move on to lowercase letters. And the reason being is because capital letters are big, they're bold, they're familiar, and they follow a very basic pattern, which makes them easy. And what's great about capital letters too is we start all of them at the top. They all have the same starting point. So when we're teaching kids just like how to begin their letters, we're not, the lowercase letter E starts in the middle, and lowercase letter G starts on the right and goes to the left. And there's all these crazy components to lowercase letters that when we're talking about kids who are learning how to write their letters, it's so much simpler to start with at the same spot. So capital letters are a lot easier to learn. And then also, if you think of capital letters, there's really just 4 strokes. There's the big curve, the little curve, the big line, and the little line. So you can kind of dissect your language as you're teaching your child to be very simple and broken down into those lines. And then also the kiddos have a good knowledge of the letters. They have been seeing them on ABC charts. They've been, watching their teachers draw them. They're everywhere. Whereas lowercase letters are less commonly seen, so they're a little bit harder to remember and therefore produce. So when we're teaching letters and how to progress and everything, there's a progression of how to teach them. So first, your child will do best with imitating the letters. So you're providing them the letter to view, and then you make the letter, and they're watching every single stroke that you're making. So if you're making the letter D, you're saying big line down, and then big curve, and they're watching you do it, and by seeing that motor planning of watching you make the letter, they can imitate you. So the actual scene of the motor planning is where we start. So the kiddos can motor plan well through making the letter initially. Then once they have that down, we can progress them to tracing the letter. So they're not watching you do it ahead of time. So you're giving them the letter D, and they're not seeing how to produce it, but they have that guideline of a line to trace or a letter to trace. So we go from imitating, where they're watching the motor planning is provided to them, to tracing, and then finally we go to copying. So the letter D is at the top of the paper, and below it, next to it, whatever you're doing, is the expectation to write the letter D. So they're no longer tracing the letter D, they're no longer seeing the motor planning, but they're copying from an example. So that's kind of that progression of when you're teaching these letters to our kiddos to go through. So imitating, where they can motor plan, you see the motor planning, tracing, then copying. Move on here. We don't, for continuing with progression of capitals, we don't teach the letters in the order of the alphabet. This is a common mistake, just because, going in the order of the alphabet makes sense. It's the order of the alphabet. But there is as we learned in our last video, and as we have talked about since, there is a developmental component to writing. So just each letter some are easier to make because of developmental lines and what lines come first, second, third kind of thing. And some letters are harder to make. So if there's a developmental component to writing, it just makes sense to also practice letters and following that same developmental continuum. I am a big fan of Handwriting Without Tears. I am formally trained in it. And it was something that was discussed a little bit in my graduate program for OT school as well. So I will refer a lot to Handwriting Without Tears purely because I am trained in it. But I also have, taken other courses on handwriting. I've also watched webinars from other experts in the field. I have knowledge from my grad school classes. So not everything that we'll be discussing today is from Handwriting Without Tears, but a lot is because it is the program that I use. So again, I use Handwriting Without Tears. I really like it because it follows the developmental sequence of handwriting. It's great. It accounts for hand development. It accounts for pre-writing line and shape development. It gives you a clear order for teaching capital and lowercase letters and cursive. And it gives you the language to say when teaching your child. And I think that's where parents like the program too, and therapists, because it's consistent with the language that it uses, and it provides you with that language so that the kiddo is hearing the exact same words every single time when you're helping them make this letter. And eventually, because of the consistency, it clicks. I included some free links from the Handwriting Without Tears resource page. They have a great website. A lot of times the programs refer to as Learning Without Tears. I knew it when it was Handwriting Without Tears, so that's what I often refer to it. But Handwriting Without Tears is kind of like a subsection within the Learning Without Tears program, where they have typing and school readiness programs and stuff. So there's the first link is just a general research page to their handwriting links, and there's free webinars on there. There's free sample sheets. There's a lot of really good stuff on there. And then the second link here has the capital letter. Let me see. Just want to make sure that you guys can see this. Let me stop my share for a second. So this is the second link. It goes over all the capital letters and how to make them. And as you can see, it breaks it down into the language to use in going back to that developmental progression. Our capital letters are made up of 4 lines. We have the big line, the little line, the big curve, the little curve. So I really like this program because it just really simplifies everything. Kids aren't hearing all these like crazy, first we go down and then we go to the top and then we make this line and then we make one at the bottom and one at the middle, and then all the language gets so complicated. So the repetition of big line down, jump to the top, big curve for the letter D is great, and I really like that from the Handwriting Without Tears program. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So I encourage you to look at those links and explore the website a little bit. So letter grouping is really important. As occupational therapists, we recognize the developmental continuum. We encourage our families to pay attention to the developmental continuum of letters and lines. So again, because letters, or because our kiddos are learning how to make these lines developmentally, we also want to teach them to make letters developmentally. So we might start with the letters that start in the top left corner and group all of those together. Then there's letters that start in the center, like the letter O starts in the center versus the letter F, which will start in the corner. So when we teach, we tend to group it based on like a starting point and also just letter line progression. And like going off of that, you know, as we reviewed last time in our last group, diagonal lines are a later developing skill. So letters such as N and M and K, V, and so on, all these letters listed here on the PowerPoint slide, they might be a little bit tougher for some of our younger kiddos, purely because we're expecting them to not just make a diagonal line, but make it in a functional way that's going to produce a letter, which means they have to place it in the correct spot, they have to start it in the correct spot, and they have to stop in the correct spot. So that's a harder skill for some kids who might not have developed that diagonal line yet. So these letters might be taught later, or they might be taught earlier, just because we're grouping letters on like the starting corner, top left versus center, but we might not expect them to have them fully mastered by a certain age. Moving on to tips and tricks for capitals. Provide your child a starting point. Capital letters always start at the top. Doesn't matter which one, it always starts at the top. I think Handwriting Without Tears even has a really cute song about that you can look into if your child's having a hard time remembering that. Break it down and use simple language. So big line, big curve, little curve. When we start going into saying all these complex things, that's when kiddos kind of lose, we lose them. They are trying to remember everything we're saying, and in the process, they're not learning any of it. So some simple tricks to remember. Moving on to our next slide, we're going to start talking about tips and tricks. This week, we're going to talk about letters and word spacing. Parents often say that a big concern for their child's handwriting is that, you know, they got the letter formation down, they're doing great with that, or they're developing that. It's just they're leaving big spaces in between letters within a single word, or all their words are meshed together and there's no spacing between their words. So as an occupational therapist, I see that concern or hear about that concern constantly. So today's tips and tricks section, we're going to kind of go over that and figure out ways that we can help support our kiddos. So one way to help with letter and word spacing is to exaggerate your spacing in your models. A lot of our kiddos, as we talked about earlier, are still in the imitation phase of things. So they're watching you write out the sentence or the word before they copy it. When you're producing spaces, make them big, make them very obvious that they're there so that there's no mistaking that there needs to be a space here. Have your child make a marking to visually label spaces. Some of my kiddos, making a dot between each word helps them recognize that there's a space there. Some of them, I'll have them put their finger down and it's a space, we need to leave our finger stamp, our fingerprint, and I'll do like a cute little like, oh, fingerprint detectives, we have to put our fingerprints all over the paper. And I've even like put marker on the kiddos' fingers or had the washable stamps, and we actually leave a physical fingerprint. So that visual is sometimes necessary to start with. You can have your child take a breath or say the word space out loud when writing. So they finish a word. Okay, it's time for a space. Let's take a deep breath or pause. Okay, let's move on. And just like pausing, stopping their body, getting their mind outside of the actual task of writing to say the word space or to take a breath actually helps them, excuse me, actually helps them recognize that there needs to be a pause in their writing too, and it like pulls them out of their headspace so that they can take that break. Helping them understand the concept of space through games and stories, leaving space between, if you know, we make obstacle courses all the time in the clinic, and that's something super fun that can be done at home too. So, oh, we need to spread out the pillows for our obstacle courses. We need a big space between these. Let's leave a big space between the pillows. So we're going to do a long jump. Oh, this one we don't have a lot of space. We have a short amount of space between the pillows. It's going to be a short jump. So making sure they understand the concept of space. I can't tell you how many times like you're asking, oh, leave a space, and the child's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And you know, it's even as adults, if we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know to ask questions about what we don't know, so there's just general confusion. And the same thing happens with our kiddos. If they don't get the concept of space, when you ask them to leave a space between words, they might not understand that. I've had some success with graph paper with some of my kiddos, that leaving boxes in the graph paper spaces, leaving those open between words. I've had some success with that. It just kind of depends on where your kiddo's at, and if they need those visual markers, it could be helpful. So if you want to try that, that's always an option. This one's fun. The next one is use edibles to mark spaces, such as M&Ms. There's definitely a bigger motivation factor with this. You'll have to kind of, it depends on the kiddo if this is going to be successful, and obviously you can't do it every single time. But kiddos get super motivated to leave spaces when it means that they get to put more M&Ms down, or more goldfish, or more Cheerios down, or blueberries, whatever you want to use. But if it's a food that they enjoy, the more spaces they have, the more food they get to put down, and when they're done writing, they get to eat it. So they're excited to leave spaces, and they're focused on leaving their spaces because the edibles helps them remember. So as I said, it's not something you can do every time you practice, but it could be an initial way of helping the kiddos remember, and then maybe you can kind of fade them out and they get a couple M&Ms or a couple treats after they write their sentences, once they start developing their spacing well. Then the next one is allow your child to review their work after writing to check for correct spacing. So just giving them that awareness of, you know, maybe they missed it in the moment, and you as a parent, you're like, oh, they forgot again. How am I going to teach them? And then, but if you give them your work, or their work rather, to check over, they're actually recognizing like, hey, I should have left a space here. So just that awareness piece, we're always so focused on awareness as OTs, the body awareness, awareness of self, allowing the child the time to be aware of something could help wonders for them next time when they actually are writing. It's increasing their awareness in the moment because they're able to process after. And then just the last one, simply verbally cueing them. Oh, you need to leave a space. Where's your space? Could be very beneficial as well. And then moving on to our next section, each week or each video series, we're going to discuss a way of helping handwriting skills develop, and often it's without actually writing. We don't need to write to develop handwriting skills, which is why in OT, a lot of times we'll be working on hand strengthening and to increase functional skills, handwriting being one of them, by like hanging on trapeze bars and playing tug of war and using different resistive materials while playing a game. There's a lot of functional play activities that actually develop hand skills. And that's why just children being able to use their hands is so important. And we actually see a lot of children in the clinic that qualify for OT. And one of the reasons being is the weakened hands. And a lot of times, you know, kiddos are just need to experience more with their hands and need to use their hands more to develop their muscles and joints and ligaments and everything. So the thumb web space is very important for hand development. As you can see in the first picture, this hand is demonstrating a nice clear web space. And when we translate that to writing, the first picture, that's labeled closed web space, that grass pattern is a thumb wrap. The thumb is wrapped around the fingers, and it is a very clear thumb wrap. And that kiddo does not have great control of that pencil. They are relying on their thumb to stabilize that pencil versus having the strength within their entire web space to allow their fingers to grasp the pencil a little bit more functionally while having that clear web space, which allows for greater accuracy, and it allows for more fine tuning of the writing. And also just allows the thumb isn't doing funky things, which is going to possibly make it so that when they are writing a lot, their hand gets very tired. So in the second picture labeled open web space, you see that nice static tripod grasp. That web space is completely open and it is very strong and stabilized when holding the pencil. So how do we get our hands stronger? How do we get our web space more defined and stronger? Through fine motor. We as OTs do a lot with fine motor. We are playing with Play-Doh, we're playing with Bear Putty, we're using resistive tweezers and tongs, we're building with Legos and resistive building materials, clothespins, chip clips, paper crumbling, taking that thicker construction paper and like ripping it and crumbling it up and using your fingers to manipulate it. Squeezing sponges and washcloths, spray bottles, those spray bottles that involve squeezing. Scissor cutting actually strengthens the hands quite a bit too. Rubber band play, pull apart and connection toys. I love squigs, those little suction cup toys, pop tubes and beads. And just remember to keep it fun and keep it functional. In OT, we're all about the occupation of play. For kids, one of their biggest occupations is to play. So making everything a game, making everything fun and functional, versus like, oh, we have 10 more reps, let's do it. I know you don't want to, but let's do it. We're always trying to make things more fun for the kiddos so that we're addressing that occupation of play while we're trying to refine our skills. So thank you. This is the conclusion of our video today. My email is at the bottom here on this PowerPoint slide. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But this was a lot of fun, and our next video, we'll go over printing and lowercase letters. And the video after that, we'll go over cursive writing. So we have 2 more left in this series following these first 2 videos. So we'll see you next time. Bye.